So how are our tests organized? Like which subset of tests do we run against which environments? And like what are the different tags that we're using to like, for instance, like quarantine and flaky and things like that.
Mhm.
I think those were like the big three things that were top of mind for me.
Okay. All right. So let me go ahead and remember what the best way to do this would be. Probably just show you my IDE so we can go through some of them. That way, if we needed to open code, we could. So let me go ahead and share my screen. And I have 3 desktops, so I got to figure out which one. There we go. All right. So let's start by saying, well, can we see my screen? Are we able
Yes.
to see the screen? Okay, cool. So within the GitLab directory, the actual source, we have a QA directory. The QA directory houses all of our stuff, as well as the framework, the tests, and all that stuff. So we have a couple things. We have the QA directory under the QA directory, which you'd think would be pretty extra, but it's to separate the actual. It's hard to explain. We have a spec folder under the QA directory, which is actually specs for our framework. And then on the QA directory, you have the framework itself. So I don't know. I guess you could argue that it is redundant, but that's okay. We'll just move on. So under the QA directory, we have page, resource. All of these are the actual page objects, the resources that actually resemble like GitLab models within the Rails framework. So for instance, you have a project, you have a group, these are models in the Rails environment. And they're also the same with our framework. We have issues, groups, CI variables, project. All these are resources that can be fabricated via the UI and the API. And they're implemented in each of these resources. The tests are under specs, so not to be confused with spec, because this is our framework directory. Under specs, we have 2 directories here, features and helpers. Features is where we would actually have the actual the end-to-end tests under. Browser UI, this is basically our entire suite right here under the browser UI directory. We have it divided into specific stages, and the number is completely arbitrary. It does not matter. Actually, you know what? That's a lie. It does. It reflects GitLab Devops. Just see if I can find that image there. Yep. So it actually it mimics this. So manage is on top. Number 1, 2, 3, create, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then since secure and defend aren't really part of the, actually, hang on. Let's see. Secure and defend. Now you got me wondering here. So we have monitor. Secure. Okay, so here's secure and enablement. And defend is not under here, but I think this might be one of the stages. But that's kind of how the numbering system works. So let's see. We have the specs divided out into kind of, as you'd expect, sort of broken out into sections within the stage. So manage has group and login project, and specs written within them. Let's see. So
these are just the end-to-end test. They
these
do not
are just
include.
the end-to-end tests. Yep. Under API, these are also end-to-end tests, but they're a lot more specific to testing the API. User spec, for instance, we can open this up real quick, and you can see that it doesn't interact with the UI at all. It just sends using the API client. So kind of our own built-in little API tester that we have. So get request and expect that it equals 200. But yes,
Do we
these are all
perform
the...
any, for the API, do we perform any post, delete actions or just get?
I'm sorry?
Do we, under API, do we test for any post or delete or update scenarios as well? APIs.
We'll test whatever we need to. We don't have any sort of, I guess we test on what we need. Mostly the API is covered in the feature specs within GitLab.
Mm.
So typically the API specs will be kind of redundant, say the least. Like for instance, get users. That is kind of a serious like URL, get users. And if that doesn't work, then the entire application breaks. I can assure you that this would be tested in the feature specs. So a lot of these are kind of redundant. There are some cases, I don't know, we don't have many. In fact, I haven't really looked at them in a while, but here's one. A user creates a project with a file and deletes them afterwards. So it looks like we do a 201. So we did a post to the create project URL with some parameters, and we expect that it was created, 201, HTTP. And then expect the JSON body response to be a hash including these two properties, etc. So there's nothing in specific we test, but I guess when we need a fast test, we'll write an API test. And I don't think many of our engineers have. I personally have not created an API test yet because it hasn't been really practical. But you can see that it's kind of lacking in the directory. We only have 4 spec files that are API. So, so under specs and features, we opened up the browser UI. There's also an EE spec, or I'm sorry, the EE directory under the feature spec, under the specs. So these are actual EE specific. Oh shoot! I just realized that graphic that I showed it was in my other screen. This is 1 manage, 2 plan, 3 create, 4 verify. You see this? This is the actual graphic that GitLab has, and so
yeah, I've seen this other place, so I knew what you were referring to.
Yeah. So yeah, that would have been helpful. I was showing my other screen and thinking that you could see it, but yeah. All right. So under the EE directory, you'll see tests that are actually specific to Enterprise Edition, so licensed instances. Let's say best example I can get. Let's see. A code owner spec. There you go. So only in the Enterprise Edition can you specify a code owner file, and that allows GitLab to actually pull from a pool of users that are owning this file, and this actually tests that. So this is an example of an EE Enterprise Edition only test. And this, if this is run on a non-EE instance, unlicensed, then it will fail.
I did notice that in the EE folder, we have secure and engage and enablement, right? But it is not in the other one. Does that mean that those 2 features are only available for the enterprise users?
Nope, only specific features. GitLab is a very open company, so most, if not all of our stuff really is open and free, but there are some features that are within those stages that are not free. And you can actually, here's the actual features page where you can actually see the different tiering. So audit logs is only available in Premium Ultimate. Authentication is completely free. And then you go down the list and you can see the different kind of tiers that unlocks. So productivity analytics. This would be if we were testing, let's say, what stage am I looking at? This is manage, right? So manage, I'd create a folder called value stream management or something, and then a spec that says productivity analytics spec. And then this would be in the EE directory because it's only available in premium and up. It's not available in the lower tiers, so we write a spec for in the EE directory. Does that make sense?
Yes, definitely. Thank you.
Whereas this one, analytics workspace, would be free in the core and free, so it would be within the regular specs. So with the EE specs, there's also something that we do to kind of combine, I want to say CE, but there's no such thing as CE anymore, to combine the free stuff with the paid stuff. In our page object library, let's see if I can find the best example. So let's say page, EE page, admin, license. Okay, EE page admin. You notice that license.rb is under our admin page in EE, but not regular. In menu, you can see that there's two of them. So let me open both of these to show you the difference. So this is the regular menu, and this is the EE version of the menu. So basically what's happening is we are prepending the Enterprise Edition to the regular stuff. That way we're not duplicating work. Any additional stuff that we need in the EE version, it kind of just plugs it right into the regular version. So monitor audit logs is not available in the regular edition. So this method does not exist to, yeah, so there's nothing there. So that's how we separate EE specs from regular specs, as well as the actual page object libraries and frameworks, how we're kind of having separation of concern between regular version and the EE unpaid version. So that's the QA stuff. Just wanted to cover a little bit on the regular lower level specs. So there's incredible benefits that we have from having our framework as a QA directory underneath the GitLab source. And one of the biggest things that we have an advantage of having our stuff in the GitLab source is we actually rely on views that are spat out in Rails. In the QA menu that we see here, for instance, we have a view defined, and we define elements within that view. If we go to this view and we look for admin sidebar, we see a data QA selector. So that's one of the biggest advantages of having our source embedded right within the GitLab source, is that we can have it in one project. We don't have to rely on two MRs, one to add the data selector and one to add the QA test or the element. So that's kind of how we get our framework to work with the source itself. Also within the regular GitLab directory, there's a spec. So if you're familiar or not familiar with RSpec, we also use RSpec in the GitLab specs. There's features under here, which actually is like a kind of an integration, UI integration type of test that's more, it's still, I don't want to consider it end-to-end, but it's still a UI test. And I can show you this by going to one of these. So just by looking at this shared example here, we visit a page, and within some ID, we fill in something with something and click on a save change. So we're actually interacting with the UI in these specs, but there's a lot less setup involved in these ones, and they run a lot more quicker because they still use Selenium and they still use Capybara, just like our end-to-end tests use. But I think it's It's a lot more lower level. And anytime we want to add an end-to-end test, it's very important that we look at these features to see if it's already covered. If it is, then we shouldn't add an end-to-end test because it's already covered. Any questions on that?
And these are all maintained by the dev team at this point. We don't look into these tests.
There's no, I want to say there's no dev team because we're all kind of devs, right? Because QA people, we can add specs here too, but mainly yes, whoever the feature writer is, I'm sorry, the feature in the application, whoever that is, they will write the specs themselves.
Okay.
Yep.
But at that point, do we perform any kind of review to see what level of coverage we have?
Yes.
Okay.
Built into our handbook. I won't pollute any time by trying to look for it, but in our handbook there is an item that says if a developer changes this spec directory, anything in the spec directory, a QA person is supposed to look at it. And the danger bot actually tells them to include a QA person to look at it. I've reviewed personally a lot of configure specs because I'm part of the configure team. So any spec that is written under here, unit or otherwise, it could be a feature because they're both under this directory. Then a QA person should review at least. Yep. Yeah. And I think there's some plan right now under that MEC is trying to implement regarding QA getting involved way earlier in the process. I'm sure you might have seen that. So, but yeah, does that answer your question?
Definitely, yes.
Okay. So yeah, I just want to clarify too. The features are the capybara tests, and these ones, anything outside of the features directory is just a regular unit test. So, sorry if that was loud, but that's fixtures. Oops. So front end, admin, statistics, store, yeah. So you have JS specs, JavaScript specs, but also you'll see RSpec tests under here. There you go. Well, that's factories. Models, CI, stage spec. Here's the spec for the stage. So you can see that it's describing a stage under GitLab's continuous integration.
Yep.
Okay. So regarding how this is all run from let's say from a recurring perspective on nightly, say, we have a very complicated and involved process. It's so complicated, but it's very involved of packaging both GitLab into a Docker container, QA this directory basically into a Docker container, and GitLab QA. And GitLab QA is our orchestrator. This kind of ties all of those components together. And so I can show you this right now. Component GitLab. So we have a GitLab component and a specs component. This will actually pull GitLab, pull the specs, and run them against that GitLab instance. So this is what that orchestrator does, GitLab QA does, is it manages that orchestration between the GitLab instance, the spec instance, or sorry, the specs container, and runs them. Actually, there is a very good architecture diagram that we can take a quick glance at. I think it's okay. Oh, where is it? Docs, architecture. Here we go. That's right. It's a markdown. Yeah, so this is the actual GitLab architecture. We build GitLab. Well, this is kind of outdated because we have CE, but Omnibus regularly builds two images: a GitLab EE version, or sorry, a GitLab version and a GitLab -QA version. So they're kind of, you can see from here on the right, let's EE and EEQA. So these two images kind of work together. And then this is how it runs. GitLab QA spins up the container, and then based on the version and image, we run scenarios against the GitLab instance.
What is the difference between GitLab EE versus GitLab EE QA version?
So the QA version, the dash QA, if you recall me saying
the orchestration. Oh, that one. Okay.
That's one. Yep. So do you see the Docker file in here?
Mm-hmm.
This is actually a project, a standalone project that runs against this project. So we packaged two versions, the regular version and then the QA version.
Mm. You also mentioned the orchestration tool, right? The GitLab -QA.
Yeah. Yep.
I didn't get that part. Where does that fit in here? Sorry.
Yeah, no problem. So that's actually what this here is.
Oh, that's what does that work. Okay.
So the GitLab QA orchestrator spins up those two images, the GitLab instance and the specs container, and runs the specs container against the GitLab instance. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So that's where GitLab QA fits in. Also, GitLab QA is basically our master for all pipelines. So anytime you see a package in QA, a GitLab QA pipeline will run. This pipeline page has, for every MR, there's an MR, there's a pipeline created. So you can see there's a lot of pages that go through this. 44 minutes ago, it shows the author, of course, Remy, but that's the last person to push. But yeah, this is kind of the orchestrator and where the tests actually are contained and run.
And these are just for the nightly runs or the staged ones?
This is for every run.
For everyone.
This is for every run, every MR, every nightly run, every thing. There's always going to be a GitLab QA state or pipeline that is run. We do have separation of like projects that say nightly. You see Quality Nightly also has pipelines. But if I recall correctly, the nightly pipeline, all it does is invoke GitLab QA. Let's see. So most of these run on a schedule. You'll see nightly, for instance, runs a semi-nightly QA in the American time zone or in the Amer time zone. So actually it's inactive. That's inactive as well. So nightly QA runs in 8 hours. So we can edit this to take a look at it. Okay, so it runs at 4 a.m. UTC every day. So that's our nightly run. So most of these are contained within schedules. If it's not an MR, it'll be a schedule. Staging, is there any questions on nightly?
No.
We are running the same test though, right? Nightly as well? Or how do we define if you want to run the quarantine test or if you want to run the full end-to-end test?
Sure. Okay. So that's the tagging system. That's let's get into that a little bit. Go to my project here, clean up so it's not so busy. Okay, so within our specs, which is the QA specs, features, browser UI, or wait, wrong. There we go. Let's just go to create and merge request, because that's, I think, the best example. So create a merge request spec. Let's take a look at this spec. So we have some capybara domain-specific language here, context, describe, before, and then we get this it, which is the example. We have a tag applied here for smoke. So this is how we denote. We use tags. This is actually an RSpec thing. You specify tags onto examples or onto contexts or onto describe blocks to kind of describe or to add metadata to something. So this is how we apply that. So let's keep looking around and see. So this one has nothing. This means that it's just a regular test that should run all the time. It's not a smoke. It's not in quarantine. It just runs. And then I will get into, Vinci, because I know you asked how you run them and how does it discern the difference. I will get to that. So let's continue here. Rebase, so we can see this one's in quarantine for this issue. Squash merge request. Okay. Let me get to mine here. So configure AutoDevOps has several tags: an orchestrated, Kubernetes, and a quarantine tag. Let's just ignore the quarantine tag for a second and focus on orchestrated and Kubernetes. Just like I had mentioned about smoke, it's just metadata that's attached to the describe block or any example. So anything under this describe block is an orchestrated test and a Kubernetes test. And the way those are invoked and read from is from if we're talking from, actually, yeah. Trying to remember. So RSpec, the way we were able to invoke RSpec by specifying these tags, and I'm trying to find the best way to show you. I think GitLab QA, that's right. GitLab QA has some documentation we can take a look at. The test can be run. Okay. Okay, so let's take a look at this right here. So GitLab QA test instance image. You'll notice that it's kind of a Rubyism here because we're specifying 2 colons. We're going to be running, this is basically a suite, so to speak. So we're running the test instance image suite. If we scroll down just a little bit more, trying to find, so not into this. Run QA against okay. Oh, I know. I can just show you the GitLab QA here. Pipeline common. Okay. QA. Okay, here we go. Okay, yeah, this is better. So, there's a lot of complexity here in this CI YAML file. So I'll try to condense it as much as possible. We have an anchor here, .qa on line 33. Let's take a look at smoke. So on 73, we extend from that anchor, and we add a variable test ops with -- tag smoke. So this right here tells RSpec to only look at the colon smoke tests that we had back here. Here's one. We only look for those. We can do the same thing with orchestrated and Kubernetes, but instead specify -- Kubernetes -- orchestrated. You can see here's a smoke quarantine, which specifies 2 tags, smoke and quarantine. So that's kind of how we can select which tests to run.
And these are all different in the pipeline project. So it's outside of our GitLab,
Yes.
GitLab
Yep.
QA and the GitLab project. Yeah.
And it's because this isn't a separate project entirely.
Yeah.
This is only because we share this kind of mechanism for running tests on multiple things. We run it in ops.gitlab.com or ops.gitlab.net rather. I don't know if we run any on dev, but there's just a lot of places where this is applicable. Let's say in project ABC we want to run this, but we want to, so we can just consume that. Another thing you'll notice that QA API down here runs adds some options for test. That's just specifying a directory to run. And here's the API quarantine to run both regular and EE. So these are also how we kind of run only managed tests there, only planned tests. So there's we can utilize our spec and its environments, positional arguments and stuff to know what to run, as well as the tagging mechanism.
Yep, got it. Thank you.
Any questions from your side, Joanna?
So right now, are we running all of the end-to-end tests against like nightly staging? How are they broken up right now? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So if we take a look at nightly, oops. Take a look at the CI YAML. We can get a deeper look into what's happening. Okay. Quarantine jobs. I don't want quarantine jobs. Okay, yeah. So basically, these are right here. Everything under 131 and down, this is what we run against nightly. And so starting from 131, instance image CE, we're extending another anchor of QA, and then we're executing GitLab QA instance image CE. And I cover real quickly on what that is. This is like a forwarder. GitLab QA, anything you specify here, test instance image, will actually be forwarded into GitLab QA here. Let's take a look at test image. Okay, so it specifies test instance all. So if we look at the suite of test instance all, we look at test instance all, this basically just is running all tests. There's no, it doesn't discriminate on one test to run. It all depends on the arguments that you're specifying. So in nightly, I guess I can shorten this answer for you, Joanna, by saying every test is run in nightly, including quarantine tests. And we can specify, that's all specified in here.
Gotcha.
Same with staging, I believe. I haven't really been involved too heavily with the staging environment, but I believe that the same thing applies. But you can see that there's also another project for staging. So whatever is specified in this YAML file is what's run. Oh, you can see that this uses pipeline common. So this runs all tests. Yep.
So who actually maintains the GitLab-QA orchestration tool and this pipeline project? Is that responsibility shared across all the quality team?
Yep, it's everybody in GitLab.
In GitLab.
Yep, but mainly it's been the seniors kind of maintaining it, the maintainers of quality. So myself, Sanad, Mark, Walmir, and Remy, we're kind of the only ones really that touch the GitLab QA orchestrator. It's also would be interesting to know the GitLab QA orchestrator is actually a Ruby gem, so it can be installed anywhere. You can gem install GitLab QA, run it from your computer, and I think some engineers do that. So
That's actually great. Do we have to specify which configuration to build every time? For example, when we're running against staging, I know we cannot configure a lot, but if we're running against any other environment, we can probably have some specific configurations. Do we have to specify that every single time? Or when you specify the environment, it kind of comes by default?
So this would be definitely easier if I can get some, if I could find the documentation. I know we have the documentation somewhere. There's a lot of places we have documentation, handbook to, to the QA directory. Let's say it's in here. Okay, yeah, here you go. This line right there will run every test against this environment using this image, using this test. So we use the yeah, so that's kind of how we can tell which environment to run against, is that positional argument.
Got it.
In some cases, like staging, for instance, staging, you can see that it included pipeline common, but where does it run? From here. We specify an environment variable called GitLab address against staging.gitlab.com. Oh, also scenario, test instance staging. You notice here, we use test instance any. So there's different things that we can run. I kind of want to see what test instance staging is. I'm going to switch over to GitLab QA and see. Test instance staging, def deployment component staging. Okay, so address is here, release here. Okay, so some code. As far as the configuration, like configuring GitLab, that's definitely possible, and that's going to be from the orchestrator. LDAP, I think, is the best example of this. Let's see if I can actually. There's a spec in here that actually changes. Oh, actually, hang on. That's not it. No. Yeah, I'm not finding it. But in here somewhere is a place where if we needed to specify like specific things for GitLab YAML, which is the basically the main configurator for GitLab. Then we would do that from GitLab QA. Yeah, there you go. So GitLab Rails production default.rb. Yeah, there you go. All this stuff. This is how you actually configure GitLab. This would be included, or this would be specified from GitLab QA. So if you needed to change, I don't know, this, you could. There's a lot going on in the GitLab QA orchestrator and
Mhm.
how it works with the actual GitLab source. But I guess in short, there is a GitLab Docker container to run GitLab. There is a QA Docker container, which is designed to run against that GitLab. And the orchestrator does that. It can tie those two images together, run those specs against that GitLab instance. And it doesn't just have to be Docker either. You can have a running GitLab instance on your local machine and run any specs against that.
That's really cool.
And so there's really, I just wanted to touch just again on the orchestrated and Kubernetes, for instance, because that's the kind of the main thing. There really is no difference between how we run those against smoke tests. It's just that RSpec tag. And I think there is, yeah, it's just an RSpec tag, and that's specified. That's kind of how we differentiate different tests, and that's just completely arbitrary. We can specify anything there. Smoke was added by me circa last year. I don't remember when, but we could always add new specs. Like if we wanted long running, we could just add like a, let's see, running, and then only run those. So that's gonna. And then, so from the example of nightly, in fact, I'm in my other monitor here. So in the example of nightly, you have all these jobs here. The quarantine instance image CE runs GitLab QA orchestrator against an image of CE with the parameters tag quarantine and tag not orchestrated. And those are rendered as jobs under GitLab CI.
So we are probably it's more like any new tag that we create, we are kind of adding that to the test or describe it, and then coming here and then just defining it in short.
Yep.
Yep, makes sense. Totally.
Exactly.
Yes. So as if of now we are running the nightly, we have the quarantine test. These are two main ones that we have scheduled ones. The rest all goes to the pipeline. Every time there's an MR request, these tests, they get triggered.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Okay.
And there's definitely some room for improvement. For instance, on an MR, it's I think there's an issue out somewhere, but there is an MR, or there's a potential for us when an MR is put in, don't run the entire suite, only run related tests.
Yeah.
So there's definitely some automation that we could plug in sometime, but that's a further iteration. But it is on the scope.
But in that case, though, right, as we have test cases created in each features from the team itself, whenever we're creating a new MR, depending on where that code change is, test aspects particular to that feature can be easily plugged in, though, right? Because end-to-end is different. We don't have to worry about end-to-end. But the other one, specifically that feature, could be run then and there itself because the tests live within the same repo. Is it that we never got around doing it, or is that?
I'm having trouble understanding. Could you reiterate a little bit?
Sure, yes. So as new features are being developed, we are creating in the GitLab project repo, you have new features. At the same time, when we go to the aspect, we have the feature tests that are being created.
Feature specs, yeah.
Feature specs, yes. So when a feature file is being changed, is it not possible for us to identify the corresponding feature RSpec and then trigger all tests in that RSpec?
It definitely is, yeah.
Okay, we just never have got to it. That's what he meant.
I guess I don't know.
Okay.
What the feature specs do, I haven't been really, I mean, none of the QA folk have been really involved heavily, because that's more of the developer domain, like the actual backend engineers and front-end engineers. But no, absolutely, there's definitely potential for that. I don't know if they do that yet or currently, but yeah.
Okay, makes sense. Yep. Okay. Sounds good. This is definitely helpful because there's so many things going on. It's good to have kind of like one picture. So this is helpful. Yes. I'm probably going to have a lot more questions, but once I dig more deeper into it, I know whom to reach out to at this point.
Awesome. Yeah. I think the best thing I can say is we have an end-to-end section of the docs.gitlab.com you can check out, and then the GitLab QA documentation shows you basically everything from how it orchestrates it to how to run it to stuff like that. So
definitely will check it out. Awesome. I'm going to stop the recording now.